Well, what time is it?
5:59.
5:59. We got T minus 18 seconds to go.
Stand by.
Stand by. Bobble standing by.
Bobble standing by.
And five, four. We're live. Okay, we're live. Oh, look at that.
Hey, we're ready to party.
Episode number ocho.
Ready to rock and roll.
That's right. We're ready to rock and roll. Still learning the board here, folks.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what button was that? Oh, there it is. Right there.
What kind of show
You
we got
found the button.
tonight, Steve?
All right, well, we got some excitement going on. Even little mini me is ready to rock and roll. All right, so of course, what do we always have? Violations. Man, he found some doozies today. I was kind of reading through these things going, does that really happen? Yes, it does. It's kind of scary. All right, then we're also going to obviously have our who? Sponsor. And that sponsor's really been coming through in the clinch, hasn't he? So he's awesome. We got questions to ask. Got some pretty good ones tonight. And of course, our spotlight. So we've got a good show coming up. And news, we got a little something for you in the news too. So hang tight. Ooh, suspense. I see. Ooh, I can see it. All right, so let's start off with some violations. Jeff, what do you think? Boom! There went the train wreck.
Yeah, there goes that deductible. Okay. We
All right.
got
What do you got for violation number one, man?
violation numero uno. Here we have a respondent failed to include terms of a rebate to the buyers in a contract.
Uh-oh.
You know, we've seen some different flavors of this before, but this one is got a little bit of a twist. So the buyers, if they bought through this real estate company, the real estate would offer a 20% rebate if they were a preferred credit union member and they either used one of the preferred lenders or title company. And that all lined up in the beginning.
Wow.
Yeah.
So basically, they said that they were going to give a rebate. And if they would have bought a property through their preferred people, I guess I should say, they were going to give them a 20% rebate. All right. So what happened?
So during the middle of the transaction, the buyers changed lenders.
Uh-oh.
And they assumed they would still get the rebate. No conversation. Transaction came, it closed, or at the closing table, they realized they were not getting the 20% discount, and that's when it all fell apart.
Oh, man. So, there's rules behind that, right? Isn't there track rules? 535.148 rebates. And then, of course, if you're going to give a rebate and you're going to, entice somebody, it's not illegal as long as you disclose it. But I think they probably should have redisclosed the fact if you use somebody other than, made it a little bit more clear instead of switching over, having the assumption that no matter who they use, they give them 20%. So that sounds like a failure to disclose item. And,
it sure was.
False promise as well. How'd that turn out for them?
$1,000 fine.
I think that'd be more. I just think that'd be more. That's kind of like a bait and switch situation. So, what's kind of funny about these violations? Sometimes you think there'd be like $1 million fine and they're only like $500. And then you would think that it's only like a $500 fine. Next thing you know, it's a $10,000 fine. So that's interesting. So did they lose their license at all or anything? Just $1,000 fine and moved on?
No, nothing else. No training, nothing. Now I think the Trek probably went a little bit lighter on this agent because uh, the buyers switched lenders, and it was But obviously, the part that Trek was saying, include that in the contract. Those details.
Right. Just in case something was to happen. So
Yeah.
it sounds like a reminder fee, not a fine. Disclose, disclose. That's what that's all about. Wow. All right, what do we got for number two? This one looks pretty ugly.
So here, the agent failed to take any action before the buyer's deadline to obtain buyer approval on the third-party financing, which led to the forfeiture of their earnest money. So
So
apparently, they had 25 days for buyer approval.
under a
The
loan.
game went.
So basically, they're under buyer approval, not property approval, two different things, right? So they put a 25-day contingency in there to get buyer approval, and the agent didn't inform their buyer that say, "Hey, look, we're on day 24, man. If you can't get financing, we better do something about this, or else you're going to lose your earnest money." And so it sounds to me like it was kind of slow to react. And so what happened was they tried to cancel it after the contingency period, and they lost their earnest money.
That's it.
Oh, not watching the time frames in the contract. That's not good either. Uh, that's not good. So what do we got? Buyer terminated contract outside of 25 days and $2,000, $2,500 earnest money. And what was the fine for behind that? Was that like a $5,000 fine or something?
$1,750.
Huh. Okay. And it looks to me like they also have to have a 30-hour contract training. So, I would kind of see that would be required, the contract training. But, in a lot of ways, that probably could have been resolved before it went to track, too. Do you believe that? I mean, sometimes you make an error, right? That's what errors are. And I think a lot of times that could have probably been mediated outside of, obviously a complaint, but every consumer has a right to make a complaint. Instead of going to track, they could have just said, "Hey, look, I'll reimburse you the $2,500 and I apologize. I made a mistake." You know what I mean? So I think a lot of these violations sometimes can be resolved outside of a complaint. But consumers, of course, it's up to them what they want to do. I'm trying to figure out where the 1750 came from. Is that half of 2,500? That is half of 2,500. Look, that's exactly right. I was like, oh, what is it here? There's got to be a formula behind this thing. All right, so we got 25, 50, and 30-hour contract value. That's not too bad, really. I thought it'd be more than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not tough to keep track of all these. Anytime
No.
you get a contract, or an offer under contract, populate your calendar, set some reminders. But it might not be a bad idea to put some other fail safes in that offer, right?
I have another question behind that. Why would it take 25 days for buyer to get approval? Isn't that a long time? I'm like, look at this going, what is it here? 25 days for buyer approval. If it takes you 25 days to get approved, that's kind of slow too, right? I think a lot of people get confused with buyer and property approval. They put 25 days in the buyer approval thinking that if the property doesn't appraise, that's another way out because of the 25 days, when they're actually two different paragraphs right there. One is for buyer approval, one is for property, and they mean two different things. So no matter if they got approved for their financing and it didn't appraise, that would fall under the buyer approval, right? Or the property approval, I apologize. And so, see what I mean? So I think they get mixed up, and that's why they put those 25 days in there. I'm looking at that as a long time. 7 to 10 days should have got you buyer approval, not 25. So that's my first thought. But, that's a long time. And yeah, you're right. It is easy to keep track of your dates. Do you put them in like tickler files or something? Hey, look, this date's coming up on this contract. It reminds me to do something about it. So maybe that's something that I might want to look into, something that can maybe track contracts a little better in time frames.
Yeah, I just I set reminders in my Google
Yeah,
Calendar. Just simple.
yeah, yeah. That's. I mean, I use Google Calendar all the time for reminders, so that might be a really good idea. $1,750, a pretty high price to learn Google Calendar,
Yeah, yeah.
though.
But why not? I mean, what? Tell me what you think about this. Under Section 6D objections in the offer on the 1 to 4 contract, why not leave that objection period blank? Give yourself another out.
Yeah, I mean, you
But
look at it. Well, I mean, you look at it many ways. There's, I wrote a course on it, right? 45 hours. There's a lot of ways out of a contract, and that's not the only way out. So, was there another way that you might have been able to look or have them consult their attorney before you do anything, of course? But these contracts are not written for the seller; they're written for the buyer. So, you're right. There could have been another way out of that contract without losing the earnest money if they would have consulted the right counsel at that point. So.
yeah, that's
That's,
another reason to know these contracts.
oh yeah, know them backwards, forwards, and upside down.
And that class that you have, the 45 outs of a contract,
Yeah,
I'll tell you what, I attend that at least once a quarter because you get busy, you forget, but
right.
those are good reminders.
Absolutely. And I think we should read the contract every so often too, so you actually know what's in it. That'd be great. I was teaching a contract class today, and I had somebody in the class. He's been in business 30 plus years or whatever, and we were going through the contract, and he said, "I didn't even know that was there. When did they add that to the contract?" So, staying current with them is also good too. So, kind of briefing through them every so often, reading through. I pick up something every time I read the contract as well. So, you know, there's a lot more ways to get out of a contract than a loan contingency, and plus there's also attorneys that are available to give you that legal advice too, right? So I was just trying to figure out why 25 days. That's an awful long time for a loan approval, but hey, might have took that long. All right, next one down, violation 3.
All right. Agent failed to have policies and procedures in place to ensure that each sponsored sale agent used proper procedures to terminate a contract. All right, this one's a little bit out there. The buyer agent, under the direction of the buyer, signed the contract, the offer for the buyer, and 4 days later, during the option period, signed the termination of that offer for the buyer.
Huh? All right, if I read this right, it says respondent failed to have policies and procedure in place. Sounds like a broker. That'd be in the broker manual, right? That's policy and procedures in place to ensure that each sponsored agent used proper procedures to terminate a contract. All right, so the buyer's agent, I'm assuming, was that the broker? Because if he didn't have any policies and procedures in place, that would probably lean back onto the broker as well, right? Because that's what the broker manual is all about. So the buyer's agent signed the offer on her client's behalf, which we can never sign on anybody's behalf, right? The only person that can sign is either the client or if you have the power of attorney. And I strongly suggest you don't ever do that, right? We don't. The only power that sales agents have to sign on somebody's behalf is their broker, right? That's called general agency. So you definitely don't want to sign on their behalf. So buyer's agent signed the offer on her client's behalf because he was asked to. Well, that should have been a power of attorney, and I would never take power of attorney. And later terminate the contract with her signature. The only person that can terminate the contract is the who? Client. So that's basically that's probably the strangest complaint I've seen in a long time. Agents signing on behalf of their client. That's insane. And so what was the actual violation? $1,000. That's all that was $1,000 fine. You would think that would be a lot more than that, but I think it might have been because of the fact there was no policies and procedures in place to actually have a proper procedures in place for the agent to know how to do it properly. So it probably leaned back onto the broker at that point in time. And I'm assuming the broker probably got a fine too.
Yeah, I don't see that, but I would expect so. Yeah,
So, you kind of look at that. That looks like a really big mess right there. And so if you also look at it, if you sign on somebody's behalf you don't have authority to do so, did you really cancel the contract?
Yeah, or were you even under contract?
That's right. Because
Yeah.
if the person that signed the contract didn't have authority to do it and they signed it, was it even a valid contract? That's the question, right?
Mm.
So that could also turn into misrepresentation and all kinds of crazy things on this thing. So I think $1,000 is the least of their concerns. So reading into that one got really scary. And I've actually heard of agents doing that. I was actually teaching a class one day, and some agent was telling me that the agent did sign on behalf of the buyer right in front of her. I was like, oh boy, you know what I mean? So
Mm.
if they don't have the power to do so, that's not a valid form. You're going to have to make sure that the client signs that form. So yeah,
She
I
almost
think
bought
that,
herself a house.
yeah, exactly. I feel like this can turn out to be a lot more than $1,000 fine if they want to push it forward. I think a lot of people also don't understand this. Just because you get a TREC complaint doesn't mean you can't get a TXR complaint too, right? Code of ethics. So that could have dribbled off onto that side. And just because you get a TREC complaint doesn't mean there's not civil suits. So,
Good
I
point.
mean,
Yeah.
it comes at you at all angles. So that's just the beginning of the problem. So who knows what would happen after that?
Mm.
All right, violation number 4 looks like a real doozy. What you got here?
Okay, so this one, I mean, some of these you look at them and you think, this can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
And here's a real good example of it. While representing the buyer, uh, they're getting dinged on acting negligently and incompetently by informing the buyer that he assumed the adjacent lot was included as part of the sale, but failed to inquire about or to verify this before entering into a purchasing contract. After closing, the buyer found out the adjacent lot had already been sold to the neighbor like 2 years prior, and he was not happy.
So, so that kind of goes back to how about meticulous, right? So we should actually do some research before we start selling these things. That does sound pretty incompetent to me. You say, "Hey, you're buying 2 lots, and you only end up with one." And so, did I wonder if the buyer paid full price for both lots?
Uh,
Have you ever thought about that? It's like, oh
yeah.
no, he's actually thinking you're spending, whatever the amount was. You're thinking you're getting 2 lots. I bet you he spent full price on that too. Oh,
Mm.
and then he only ends up with one of the lots. So yeah, I mean that just goes again. Know what you're selling. That's your scope, right? We should do some
Mhm.
research on this. Just because a seller says they own it, don't mean they own it. And number 2, some of these surveys could be pretty messed up. So I wonder if they got a new survey done on the property before they sold the property. I wonder if they even checked the public records of what I wonder how that was described in the contract. Can you imagine that? And if there was any research done, so that's major negligence right there. Man, that's
But
horrible. You imagine thinking you're buying 2 lots, you're going to buy one. See,
yeah, but let me tell you how the conversation went. Okay, the buyer asked, "Hey, is that part of it? Is that lot included?" The agent responds with, "I assume it's part of the sale, but I'm not sure." And no further discussion was that. So I mean, that anybody could do that. You have to qualify this. You have to I mean, you have to be very clear when you're under contract, right?
yeah.
But that's as far as it went. Mm.
So I mean, I look at it this way too. As a buyer, if I ask somebody, "Hey, does that lot go with it?" and you look at me and go, "Well, I assume it does," what would you be thinking in your mind? That's not a guarantee. Don't you think you should say, "Hey, man, can you check into that for me before we write up an offer?"
Right.
So it kind of goes back on to how about reasonable thinking? You know what I mean? Because there's no way in the world as a buyer I'd accept that as an answer. If somebody says they assume anything, I'm questioning it. So you
It
kind
it
of look at it.
it feels like the buyer is taking advantage of this, but we're still on the hook.
Yeah, exactly. So unfortunately, the buyer's not licensed. We are.
Yeah.
So, and they do rely on what we say. But again, the word assume, right? You know what I mean? How can you rely on somebody that assumes something? All right, so buyer assumes adjacent lot was included in the sale the neighbor purchased, and the agent said, "I assume it's part of the sale." And what was the fine on that one?
The fine on that, $750. So I think Trek felt a little sorry, but they weren't going to let it slide.
I think they probably looked at the word assume, so maybe put a little liability on them as well. You know what I mean? Because I mean, but that it does happen. I've actually heard it before. Especially like when you're out in the country, out selling farm or ranch, or whatever. There's a little piece of acreage out there. Hey, does that come part of it? Yeah, I guess it would. You don't know, right? So that's why A, do some research, and B, there's an app out there called Land Glide. Land Glide. You use that, don't you? Land Glide.
Yeah.
It's an app you can actually download onto your iPhone or your Android, and you can be out in the middle of nowhere, and you just kind of find GPS, location. Boom, there you are, and it shows all the property boundaries. So that would probably give you a better guesstimate than I assume so. You know what I mean? So, there's a lot of tools that we can use to also kind of help us out. Google Earth could help you out. MapRight can help you out. We talked about apps and we talked about things that we use out in the field. And I think that probably would have helped out a lot than just, I assume so. And if I was a buyer, don't you think you'd want a new survey before you bought the property?
Mm. Yeah.
So I wonder if that was sold cash or however that was, because I don't know. And plus, you could also ask for the seller's existing survey, right? That's 6-1, right, of your contract. So if you look at the survey, you're going, wait a second here. And the title company might have caught that too if they looked at the survey. I'm like thinking about this. This is going to untwine into a whole bunch of weird stuff going on. So I'm just wondering if it's just a cash deal and they just kind of didn't want the survey and they moved on. So,
I mean, I hate to be defensive, for the agent, but a part of this feels like for it to go all the way through title and everything, and then find out after it closed that it wasn't included. I just think there's some ownership on that buyer.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, and it's just, I can't believe it got that far without a red flag. So, so I agree with that. That's pretty crazy though. But does it happen? Apparently it does, right?
Yes.
The weirdest thing about these violations is you look at them and go, wow, that actually happens, so, and these are great to make us all aware of the fact that things are happening out there. And definitely going through these violations has helped me quite a bit too, to kind of recognize that, hey, we got to be more, astute. We got to be more aware, and we got to do a lot more research on what we're doing. And we do have a responsibility to do that. That just, just emphasizes it more and more every time I read these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
All right, the violations are pretty crazy. Do you got one more or what?
I've got one more.
Uh-oh.
So here we got an agent licensed in Oklahoma.
Uh-oh.
Well, hang on. Let me see if I got this correct. While in Texas, respondent, unlicensed in Texas, negotiated a letter of intent for the sale of an Oklahoma commercial real estate or real property shopping center with the expectation of receiving commission. So let me pull up this.
That sounds real confusing.
Yeah.
So they're licensed in Oklahoma. Is that what it says?
Yeah, this is okay. Here's count one. Ms. Silva acted as a buyer's agent. Nope. I'm sorry, that is not the right one. Let's get the right one here. And this is where we learn to be prepared, like the Boy Scouts.
It's all good. It's starting out like they were licensed in another state and they try to negotiate in Texas. Is that where it's kind of going?
Yeah. So at the time of the event, did not hold a Texas real estate broker or sales agent license. Negotiated and prepared a letter of intent in Texas on behalf of for a commercial parcel of real estate. So basically, they didn't get paid commission
Right.
on the LOI stating that 2% sales commission on the sale of that property, and now they probably raised some stink about that and ended up finding out at the time they weren't even licensed.
So basically, it sounds to me like they were doing unlicensed activity.
Yep.
That could actually be a real problem because that could be a criminal offense too.
Mm.
So if you look at it, practice without a license, that could actually be a criminal offense. So I wonder what happened to this person. So they try to negotiate something, get paid a fee. That's the thing. If you're going to get paid a fee, you got to be licensed, right? So if they weren't making a big stink about the fee and they were doing it on the fact that they weren't expecting any fee, monetary or anything, any monetary monies or any monetary fees or anything of that nature, you could negotiate on their behalf. But here's the problem with that. That could also end up giving legal advice too, right? Without a license. So it sounds to me like they really got themselves in a situation and they're trying to get a fee for not being licensed. And where did that come up? That's unlicensed activity, right? Is that what it comes up as?
Yep.
Oh, wow. All right. So what was the order? It looks to me like
$2,000 fine.
I would think it'd be a lot more than that, trying to sell property without a license, because it could have been up to a $4,000 fine, and it could have actually been a criminal act as well. So they got away pretty good for that one. So that just goes to show, if you're going to do real estate, get a license, right? Because TREC does enforce that unlicensed activities. So that's pretty scary.
Yeah. Okay.
I see you're getting
Well,
button crazy there.
we do have a little word from our sponsor.
All right, cool.
Oh, no, wrong one.
Nope. Hey, I like your Google Calendar, though. That's nice, man.
Yeah,
I
you
enjoy
like
it.
that? Let's close that. Let's close the Google Calendar.
And there's your sponsor right
Boom.
there, Handyman Moore. There he is.
Yeah.
That looks like what is that? His Facebook page or his Instagram?
Yeah, Facebook page. And I'll tell you, every week, that's why he's on here. He's one of our big sponsors, but he every week is pulling an agent out of a jam. And he pulled me out of a jam this week.
What did he do for you?
He went out and fixed a water pump, went out, got the home cleaned, which was vacant, completely rebuilt a picnic table.
Wow.
These are all things that, sometimes finding the right people to respond timely is like pulling teeth.
Especially on the fly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a pretty quick response too. So cool. So Handyman doing a great job, and it looks got Jeff up and running again. So he's got to be a good. So he's got to be doing something right. That's all I gotta say.
So,
all right, cool.
From big to small, Handyman Plus does it all.
There you go.
All right. We're done with violations, so we can turn that bad boy off.
I was going to say, we're still on violations. All right, you got a new one? All right, so what's next there, Jeff?
Do we want to do news next, or you want to do the agent questions?
Well, there's not a whole lot going on the news, except for a couple things. All right, we'll just kind of throw a couple things out there.
Hang on.
Yeah. I was waiting
a
on
little
that.
more dramatic.
I was waiting. Well, all right, now you can talk. All right, now here's the deal with the news. I was actually watching I like to watch the economy and see what it's doing. They are actually saying that the Federal Reserve is saying they're going to cut 2024. They're planning on cutting the interest rate 6 times. Did you read that?
Oh, no.
Did you read about that? Yeah, they're talking about that the actual economy is cooling off a little bit. And they're expecting that 2024 is going to bring us some lower interest rates, and they're expecting 6 interest rate cuts. Is that good news, or is that good news? And then the NAR economist came out with something that states that if the interest rates go down the way the Federal Reserve is saying they can possibly be cut, that can actually stimulate the housing market by 13.5%. So I don't know about you, but that's good news to me. And if you can simulate the housing market by 13.5%, I'm looking at it like this: we might get more multiple offers. We might be going back to a multiple offer situation, and hopefully we get some of these interest rates down. They're predicting, now I don't know if they're right or they're wrong or indifferent, but the first interest rate cut's going to be around February. That's what they've been saying, and bring it down to around the mid sixes. We're at 7.15 today. So they can bring it down to the mid sixes, and they're hoping by the summertime that it's going to be around mid fives.
You imagine? Oh,
That would be absolutely amazing, considering, remember that lender we had on? If the interest rate goes down 1%, it brings out 5 million buyers nationwide. So that would be 2%, or actually it'd be a little bit more than 2%. It might bring out up to 10 to 15 million more buyers. So if everything goes well, I'm expecting summertime to be a pretty hot market.
yeah, that's
So
going to be crazy.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy. So not only that, we might go back into the multiple offer situation. Remember the good old days when we had multiple offers on those properties? I don't know what's worse, multiple offers or not having it properties, because, either way, it's going to be hard to get that property. But I'm glad to see that the interest rates may come down and we have a possibility of some growth. So that's amazing. Another news flash today was Airbnbs. Like a lot of these cities are starting to put a lot of restrictions on Airbnbs. Like Arlington, you can only have an Airbnb around the ballpark. Austin, they have some restrictions on their Airbnbs. And Dallas was talking about they wanted to pass a bill that said you can have Airbnb in residential areas. Well, today a judge just passed a ban on that judgment. So guess what? That didn't go through. I'm pretty sure it's going to be appealed, but Dallas is having a little hard time passing a law that says you can't have Airbnbs. So, that's pretty good news, because what do most people do? They buy properties. They want to use those properties the way they want to use their properties. And of course, nobody wants the government telling you how to use your property, right? Because, an Airbnb is a lease. But on the flip side of it, they're trying to use it and say it's also a nuisance, and that goes against zoning violations. So I'm glad that they kind of put a band on, that judgment right now to kind of figure out probably a more suitable way that will accommodate everybody involved. So that's the big news flash coming out. So that is good news, you know what I mean? Because I hear, I get a lot of people that ask, they want to buy a property, can you use it for an Airbnb? So a lot of cities were starting to clamp down. In fact, South Lake tried to clamp down on them, and that didn't work out for them either. Fort Worth is going to, they've been talking about clamping down on some of these Airbnbs too. So it's going to be interesting how that case is going to not only affect Dallas, but also may affect surrounding cities. So that's the big news flash for today, which I thought was really good news, actually.
I've got one. Not sure. Did you hear about the new Universal Studios Park going in Frisco? They just announced.
I did not. When did they announce that?
December 5th.
So when's that supposed to come out?
It's supposed to be completed by 2026.
That's about when all the roads are going to be completed. I think 35 should be done by then, right? All right. So what is this? A new amusement park? Who is it?
Yeah, it's a new
Universal Studios. So that means there might be actually taping movies here. Wait a second. All right, so they got Universal Studios in California, obviously Hollywood. They got it also in Florida, so they're coming out to Frisco. So that's awesome. So, and I'm thinking Universal Studios probably because it's a little, up in those areas, a lot of IT stuff as well. So they're probably going to be starting to do some pretty cool movies around here. So, what do you think that's going to do the property values?
Well, I mean, it's Frisco. They did offer them, over $12 million in tax incentives to come there. So, but it's supposed to be a 300-acre hotel or 30-acre hotel, 300 room. I mean, it's a big It's a big to do.
Yeah, no
But I
kidding.
did share that link.
I wonder if they're going to have the Jaws exhibit there. That'd be awesome. Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, I went to Universal Studios in California. You remember the Jaws? Everybody used to be scared of Jaws. I remember watching my first Jaws. I was scared to even go to the bathtub, thinking Jaws would come out of the drain. And then when we went to go see the actual Jaws exhibit, you could see how fake it was. Like, what is that? What am I scared of? So that's actually kind of cool to see how these movies are made, too. So interesting.
Yeah, that's funny. That is
Well,
funny.
that is good news, actually, because that could actually possibly raise property values and bring in some more people, right? So Frisco's already pretty quick growing, but that's also might raise your property taxes. So that's
Mhm.
another issue that you might run into as well. So that's cool,
Yeah,
man.
they got
That's
to
good.
make up for that 12.7 billion in tax incentive they just gave them.
Yeah, we gave him a tax incentive. Guess who's going to have to pay it back? Oh, welcome everybody. You have a great day.
Mhm.
All right, cool. That's good news.
All right. Oh, here it is.
Oh boy.
This is our right up there with the violations. People like to ask Mr. Steven questions, and
Uh-oh.
you've got the sheet in front of you. I've got a couple here. I know you've got a couple. What you
Yeah,
got?
I do got a
You want to
few over
start?
here. Yeah, I got one right here that came in, which is kind of interesting one. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, multiple offers and so forth. This one came out of Midland, Odessa area.
Oh.
Pretty cool. All right, so Billy actually asked, "What's up, Billy?" All right, he asked this. He said, "I'm going to kind of paraphrase it for you. Is that all right?" So the question is, under a multiple offer situation, and how many backup offers can you accept? So if you accept one offer and you have multiple offers, how many backup offers can you accept at the same time? That's a pretty legit question. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah,
I
that's
actually had
legit.
somebody in class. Yeah, I actually had somebody in class one day said that they were working 27 multiple offers. I was like, wait, what? All right. So basically, you can only accept one offer, correct? Now, as many offers can come in as you want, but the bottom line is this: if you accept one offer, you can only accept how many backup offers? One, right? Ethically, you can only negotiate one. Now, here's something else that I'm going to add to Billy's question. All right. Now, instead of all these multiple offers that come in under state law, what can the seller do? They can ignore, right? You can ignore the offer. What else can you do? You can accept it, you can reject it, you can counter it, you can do pretty much whatever you want with it. But I found that there's a form out there that is really good when it comes to multiple offers. It's called the TXR 1926. Have you ever seen that TXR 1926?
Is it the invitation?
Yes, it is. All right. So the TXR 1920, 19, or I'm sorry, TXR 1926 is basically seller's invitation to write a better offer, right? So you're basically not counter offering, you're not denying, you're basically saying, look, we got a bunch of offers in. The seller would be more inclined to take your offer if the buyer wasn't asking for closing costs. And you can send it back to that, send it back to the agent, see what they can do. I've heard people use that form, and the buyers actually send back $20,000, $30,000 more than the original price. Well, another thing that people don't realize is if you got a $400,000 house and they're asking for 5% concessions, if you write them back and say, hey, the seller would probably be more open to taking your offer if they weren't paying 5% concessions and they only had to pay 1% concession, that right there would save them $16,000 and that would raise the offer price. So see what I mean? So it's not just you're asking for more money, but sometimes if you're asking for, hey, we don't want to pay these concessions, or no, we don't want to pay, any repair, whatever the situation. No, we don't want to have to pay for the survey. That could save them money too, right? No, we don't want to have to pay for the title policies. So all those little things add bottom line to the seller. So I found that seller's invitation works out pretty well instead of just
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I got 10,000 offers. What do I do? Well, send them a seller's invitation. Then you don't have to worry about running into counter offers, unethical practices, accepting more than one backup offer, something like that. So it actually works out pretty well. Have you ever used it before?
I have, and it does work out well. And I think it's also important to note that when you're submitting an offer, especially multiple offers,
Uh,
it's your opportunity. That's your elevator pitch to
yeah.
make it to stand out. And sometimes it's good to kind of calculate the net proceeds for the other agent. It might be a younger, newer agent, and for you to do that, and you can look up estimated liens on
Yeah.
houses and all that, and calculate it for them. But yeah, that invitation offer is nice.
All right. Yeah, that was a good question, Billy. Thanks, man. All right. You got one, Jeff?
Yeah, we've got one. This is an intermediary. This is from Paulette, and she happens to be from Frisco, right where that 30-acre hotel is going to go. No,
All
I'm
right.
kidding.
Party on.
But she's asking, so as an intermediary, how do I fill out page 10 of the 1-to-4 contract? Because it has the other broker firm, listing broker firm,
Yeah.
and so she just doesn't have any real good idea, good warm and fuzzy how to fill it out.
Oh, okay. That's an easy one. I love these easy questions.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if you go over to your the contract 20-17, right? The number is 20-17. You go to page 10, and that's basically, there it is right there, broker information. And so under the broker information, if you go over to the right hand side, it will say listing agent, right? If you go over to the left hand side, it says other broker. Well, other broker is the buyer's agent. So other broker is basically the buyer agent. Listing agent is the listing agent. Now, if you're the intermediary, that kind of changes around. So what happens is you go to the listing agent, see where I'm at on the right hand side, and then they would become the selling agent. So on the right hand side, that's why there's two spots right there for intermediary status. Then, of course, what are you going to check? Seller and buyer as intermediary. So if anybody in your office, let's say, for instance, you have a listing and another agent within the same office finds a buyer, you're still an intermediary. That's what a lot of people don't understand, because the intermediary starts at the broker level, right? So if another agent in your office and or you as the listing agent find the buyer, that'd be intermediary without appointments, you end up on both sides, and you're disclosing that fact because why? You're the selling agent and the listing at the same time. So, yep, that's why they have two sections right there on page 10. That's a good question.
Yeah, good question.
Actually, really, I think a lot of people get confused with that.
Yeah.
All right, I got one for you.
Yeah.
It's actually a pretty good one. It actually has to do with a backup offer.
Oh.
It seems like there's been a lot of backup offer questions today. All right, believe it or not, this one actually came out of San Antonio, and Lucy's her name from San Antonio. All right, so what she asked was, if you submit an offer for backup, do you have to give the earnest money and option money the same way you would as an original offer? That's a pretty good question right there.
Yeah, it is good.
All right. So if you have a backup offer and the contract calls for it, right? That's paragraph 5 in your contract. You don't have to have earnest money to make a contract, right? But if you do put in the offer that you're going to give earnest money and option, and it's going to be in backup position, yes, you do. You still have to submit that to the what? Title company, right? And so even if it's a backup offer and option money, they back out of the backup offer. What did they lose? Well, if you back out of the backup offer, that's what the option money is for. So what's going to happen is you're going to lose your option, but not your what? Earnest money if you back out of the option within the time prescribed. So, or the backup within the time prescribed. So that's a really good question. I think a lot of people get confused with that. So even a backup offer, you got to, if required, give the earnest and option. So that's good. That's a real good question.
Yeah, good question.
All right, you got one?
I've got one. This is a newer agent. Uh, Her name is Melissa, and she's out of Roanoke.
Hey, all right.
Yeah, and she's got a question about the DSCR loan. She's working with an investor. Doesn't quite understand what the DSCR is, and she wants to kind of become more familiar with it. So she's asking for some explanation on that. And as we know, that those type of loans are usually a little bit higher interest rate. They usually require a little bit more down, but it's based on the income of the property and not, qualifying by the buyer. So
Yeah, so sometimes you can get into those. It's kind of like they're kind of I'm going to do layman terms, kind of an alternative loan, if you will. And they don't fit the guidelines of Fannie and Freddie per se. They're kind of the loan of their own, and a lot of investors use those because they might not be able to have the income to verify the way they probably could. You know what I mean? So they can actually use 1099s, or they can also use the income that it produces from the property to actually qualify to buy the property. So, and plus, it also may require even more down payment too, because a lot of times they might only give 80% loan to value. So you might have to come up with 20% down. And your credit, sometimes has to be in the 680s or something. But, for an investor, that's not a bad deal. If you can get into a property 20% down and they're only qualifying you off the income that it's making, as long as you're breaking even, most investors don't make money right away off buying property anyway. They make it off the depreciation of the property, right? Repairs and everything else. And so those DSR loans are actually a pretty good setup for somebody that is investing in property.
Yep, the debt service coverage ratio. Yeah.
Yep.
So good question.
That's right. So as long as the income covers the debt, that's a good thing, right? So not a bad deal. I think it's better than hard money sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, hard money runs what? 14%? 15?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's what, 2%, 2% up front, and then all of a sudden you're going interest only for at 12% interest. So, after a while that can add up, and so at least the DSR is actually amortized, and you can refinance that possibly later into a lower rate. So it might be better if you're going to have a long-term hold, let's put it that way. And most investors, if they're going to buy a DSR, probably want to keep that property for a rental for 2 to 5 years for long-term capital gains, not short-term capital gains. Anything over 1 year is long-term capital gains. So that would actually probably be a better avenue to go. All right, you got one more?
I do. I've got one more, and this has to do with title policy.
Uh-oh.
And this is under the will be amended to read shortages in area at the expense of buyer or seller. She just is kind of asking, what exactly does that mean?
All right, so that's under 6.8, right? Is that where we're at? 6.8 on the contract? All right, so a lot of people seem to think that this means land shortage. There is no such thing as land coverage, right? There's no such thing as that, all right? So like land insurance, there's no such thing as land insurance. So I think a lot of people get confused with this because it has to do with, if you read it very careful, it has to do with discrepancies, conflicts, shortages in an area or boundary lines, encroachments, intrusions, or overlapping improvements. That has nothing to do with land, what? Coverage. So the best way to explain this is this. Let's say, for instance, I'm selling my property and Jeff wants to buy it. Sound good? Thanks, Jeff. All right. So we have an evil neighbor named Bobby. All right. So my evil neighbor named Bobby builds a shed, and unfortunately, it's 20 feet onto my side of the yard. Sound good? All right. Now, Jeff wants to buy the property, but we're going to sell him the property with a T47 and an existing survey. And so basically, if we get a T47 and existing survey, we didn't have to get the land surveyed, right? So who is actually interested in land surveys are the title company and the lender, correct? And so if we give you an existing survey T47, everybody's all excited. We're never going to find out about that overlap, right? Because we didn't get it resurveyed yet. So next thing you know, we sell it to Jeff, right? Now Jeff owns the property. Now he wants to sell it to somebody named Barbara. All right, Barbara comes up and says, "Hey Jeff, I want to buy the property." Jeff's like, "Yay, sounds great." But Barbara's lender is going to require her to get a survey. Ruh-roh. All right, so now once the survey is performed, what are they going to find? Our evil neighbor Bobby's that he built over on the yard, right? So that's called a what? An encroachment. And so if you check the box, will be amended to read shortages in the area at the expense of. If that coverage was in place, then what's going to happen is Jeff's, that coverage will be with Jeff, right? So he can call the insurance company. They'll probably write Bobby a nastygram and say, get it off the yard. Or they can actually reimburse for the loss of what the property would be according to the space, the area, and the market amount. And so that's basically what that is for shortages or encroachments, not land shortage. Now, if you read that will be amended to read would be added to your policy. Does that make sense? And so if they add it to your policy, who's actually going to pay for this? Well, if you're working with the buyer, you want the seller to pay for it. If you're working with the seller, you want the buyer to pay for it. And so how much is that coverage? It's about 5% of the owner's policy. So if your owner's policy is $1,000, $50. Does that make sense? So it's pretty cheap. And so it's actually assurance, not insurance, because that can actually happen anywhere. So that's a great question. I get that question an awful lot. And unfortunately, I believe a lot of people misunderstand that or explain it wrong. And just understand that it's an encroachment situation, not a shortage of land situation. Nobody's going to reimburse you for shortage of land. You see what I mean? That's why we get surveys. That's why we get plats. And so you want to address that before the closing, not afterwards. Say, oh, I got an insurance policy for that. I thought it was something different. So that's a great question. Really good question, actually.
Yeah. That's all the questions I have. How about you?
You know what? That's all I got too. I only had a couple of them.
Well, then I get to push this button.
There it is. All right.
Well, I mean, we're already at the 52-minute mark.
Yeah, this is
we're having fun.
Time flies when you're rambling. All right. All right. So what we're going to do is, I guess we'll go ahead and shut it down for the day, huh?
Sounds good.
Sounds good. All right. So if anybody has any questions, you can always email us at realestateramble@gmail.com. We're more than happy to take your questions. Read them on the definitely read them on the show. Give you credit for the questions, and we encourage questions because that only helps everybody involved, right? So it helps everybody. Or you can also call us at 940-230-2899, and you can also leave your questions on voicemail, or of course, if somebody picks up, you can always tell them about it as well. And the last thing that we encourage is, if you know an agent out there or anybody out there, agent, insurance agent, title company, lender, anybody out there that you want to spotlight, please tell us about it, and we'll be more than happy to get them on the show. So.
Now we did have we were going to showcase our store with the Ramble merch, but we learned that the same hackers that took down the Fidelity network this last week just recently attacked our store, so we're working with them to get that back up.
Uh-oh. So it could be out for a while. All right, guys. Well, what we're going to do is call it good for the night. I appreciate everybody showing up, and reach out to us if you have any questions, and or if you want to spotlight somebody, we're more than happy to put it on for you. All right. So we're actually going to start doing some raffles too. Remember, we were talking about that, and we might have to do some. We're going to start our raffles next week, and so that would be a really good time. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, to call in and give us a good question or a spotlight, and we're going to put a name in a tally. And so what's going to happen is we're going to put all the names that give us some questions. We're going to give all the names that give us spotlight, put them all in a big bag and shake them all up. And if your name gets picked, guess what you get? A free Ramble shirt. Where'd you go wrong? So, all right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we're going to call it good. Jeff, you got anything else to say?
Nope, that's it. You got it. You wrapped it up. Thank you, sir.
All right, cool. All right, well, you guys have a great day. Ramble you later.